Why did this become your debut feature film? What initial interest did you have in the real life case that inspired the screenplay and the subsequent film?
Yeah, I was introduced to this case and to the sovereign citizen movement sort of at large because I had a family member who really, as part of a mental health issue, became really involved in anti-government conspiratorial thinking.
Hmm.
And so I'd had a front row seat to what that looked like in real life. And as trying to understand that, I tried to understand what this was. And I had heard a lot of this same kind of, pseudo legalese jargon
Hmm.
over the years. And so I started researching the sovereign citizen movement and came across this crime. And really, the father son dynamic at the center of that
Right.
uh, just felt really compelling to tell a coming of age story of a kid 15 years old being raised in an environment like that, and just what that says about sort of the opportunity to speak to larger themes that I was really interested in, not just about fathers and sons and sort of
Right.
masculinity in a lot of ways,
Right.
but also about the world that we're living in and
Right.
our culture.
Yeah. So you have a high level and pitch perfect cast. What was the process of assembling these bold faced names? But more importantly, what interested them individually about what you were saying in the story?
That's an interesting. Yeah, we were incredibly lucky to get this cast, especially on a film this size. It's kind of an all-star lineup
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
little independent movie.
Hmm.
Um, Really, I think the thoughtful, I use this analogy when I was pitching the actors, but also all of our department heads. There was this book called "The Art of Simple Cooking" by Alice Waters that was about. It's a cookbook. It seems like it has nothing to do with film, but the whole philosophy of her cooking is uh, to if you're going to present a carrot, let it taste like a carrot. It's all about presenting things really simply and objectively and letting them be as they are.
Right.
And I think we tried to take that approach not just with the story, but with the photography, with the performances. To really drill down on each element and let it sort of stand on its own. And so that kind of uh, objective approach, I think, interested the actors. Nick Offerman specifically had always wanted to play uh, kind of like a preacher or an evangelist of some kind, and I think this scratched that itch for him. Um, and Jacob, we were was being introduced to the world sort of again as a as an adult actor
Right.
after we'd seen him in so many roles as a kid. So and for the rest of the cast, I think that they once Nick was on board and Dennis and Jacob,
Yeah.
everybody else sort of coalesced around that. They'd all work
Right.
together, and so we were very lucky.
Excellent. What is interesting to me about Nick Offerman is that he is really, if you look at his filmography, a chameleon like character actor, and of course, excellent in your film, since he also has a persona as a rugged individualist himself. Where did he know when to turn up the volume on the character and when to make it more quiet?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, his instincts and as an artist and an actor are just so fine tuned. I think our process was a lot of kind of exploration and repetition. We would try things a lot of different ways.
Mm.
We have a lot of conversations about, because that text is hard to follow logically, some of that stuff. His ideas are complicated. And so getting in the weeds of being able to really understand where that's coming from, I think that was my value, at least to the actors, was to be able to sort of be a guide in some of that. But Nick, Jacob, all of their performances are they're just incredible actors. I mean, you get lucky with a cast. I don't know what his sort of alchemy is that he his magic trick, but he does
Yeah,
it in this, and it's
yeah.
it's thrilling to watch.
It's definitely one of the best things I've seen him in. Now, both the contrasts and similarities between law enforcement and the sovereign citizens as groups are artfully apparent in your story. What struck you about these somewhat hard to decipher societies in their differences and similarities, and how does it best come out in the story?
Yeah, I think there's something about both of those movements and the drive to conquer and towards individualism and supremacy in a way. I think that that's something that also naturally taps into like a male instinct, and that paired nicely with a story of fathers and sons, really.
Right,
I think tempering that urge and maybe taking a bit more compassionate and empathetic approach is really sort of the central message of the film. Um, but it certainly on another level also was just looking at systems that exist in this country, and sort of instead of making a moralistic judgment maybe or a right or a wrong judgment on it, to just try to sort of look at how things like this happen, um, from a motivation standpoint.
right,
How does somebody end up going to a seminar of Jerry Kane's? How do the Jerry Kanes of the world sort of pop up? And then in terms of the policing side, some of the more militaristic tactics maybe, or the ways that they approach, that law enforcement is criticized for, rightly so in many cases. But why is that training in place? Why do they sort of approach situations like that? And it's because that's their training, and it's an incredibly dangerous job, and they don't know who they're going to confront. So
right,
I think it's easy to kind of say good or bad and kind of condemn, but if you really step into someone's shoes, usually, which we try to do with this film, you
right.
can see how the system kind of leads to these sort of conflicts, and
Yeah.
yeah.
It would be easy in less competent hands to paint the sovereigns as villains, but within the film's context, there are explanations and somewhat law backed rationalities, as you mentioned before, that the society practices. Where does it go off a cliff for you, and what empathy do you have for the movement?
I don't know that in my personal view, my empathy kind of goes off a cliff maybe at any point.
Okay,
Even, you can talk to guys that are on death row who have done horrific things, and I think you can have empathy. I think you can have compassion for maybe what motivated some of that.
right,
But that's very different than excusing or condoning or accepting or tolerating. I think when it moves into actions that are harming other people and harming the people around you, and things that are illegal and certainly crimes
right,
of this nature,
right,
that's off limits. It kind of doesn't matter what got you there.
right,
But I think that's sort of the fine line, there's we're very individualistic. Obviously, American culture is really individualistic, and this film sort of talks about some of the ideas of sovereignty, I guess, symbolically in the movie.
mhm,
Um, but when your individual freedoms, when they start to affect everybody else and cause harm to everyone else, I guess that's the line maybe for me.
right. Okay. So there's a John Wayne quality to Dennis Quaid's character in a positive way in the film, which the underrated Quaid delivers to perfection. In your point of view, does law enforcement need a set of rules in which flexibility is not an option?
I think that law enforcement has been put in a very difficult position of having to respond to situations that their training has not trained them to respond to in many
Hmm.
cases.
Hmm.
Specifically, I think with how we deal with mental health in this
Yes,
country.
yes,
I talked to a lot of Arkansas police worked with us on this film, and a huge portion of the people in their prisons and of their people that they run into, and their in their job day to day, are people who are mentally ill,
mm,
and not just mentally ill, but this sounds like derogatory in a way, but I don't mean it this way. Like people who have mental retardation, who have
right,
actual cognitive deficits, who maybe
yeah,
were born with fetal alcohol syndrome,
right, right,
were born to a drug addicted parent, so you have people with real cognitive impairments who do violent things or break the law or get into these situations maybe because they're, and the police are the ones to respond to that. And
right,
I have I have a lot of compassion for what they're forced to do because there's not another system in place, and they don't want to do that job either.
Right.
So I think that that's maybe where the John Wayne
Right.
character runs into some trouble.
Um, what is your next project, and how does it either relate to or is totally different from Sovereign?
Well, I've got a couple things I'm working on right now. I don't know which one is going to be my next one. I have I have another film that is a crime. I guess you'd call it a crime drama
Hmm.
that is set in a very specific time and a place, and same way that this film was set in 2010 was about a very specific world. This also takes place in a very specific world at a very specific time. Um, and and I think also is a story that gives me the ability to talk about themes and things that I think are that just I'm naturally interested in. So
Sure.
it's a little larger scale, but I hope that'll be the next one. But I won't say any more about it because I don't want to jinx it.
Sure. This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2025.